The sun had barely risen over the rugged mountains, casting long shadows across the dusty plains. In a hidden canyon, a young Apache girl named Ayanna crouched near the entrance of a small silver mine. Her hands were raw and cracked from years of hard work. Her dark hair hung in tangled strands across her face, and her brown eyes, though tired, glimmered with a quiet strength. Ayanna had been taken from her village when she was just a child. The world she remembered from those days was distant now, like a faded painting she could barely make out. Life in the mine was harsh. The air was thick with dust that made her throat ache, and the walls were dark and damp. She spent hours each day digging, hauling heavy stones, and watching the other slaves, mostly children and young girls, struggle beside her. The mine owners were cruel, their voices sharp and commands unkind. Ayanna had learned early to keep her head down and to speak only when spoken to. She knew that any misstep could mean a punishment worse than the labor itself. The sound of pickaxes striking rock echoed through the mine, a constant rhythm that had become part of her life. Ayanna moved carefully, her small hands steady despite the exhaustion that weighed down her body. She had long forgotten the feeling of freedom, the warmth of sunlight on her skin, or the softness of grass beneath her feet. Her days blended together, each one a repetition of toil and pain. Yet inside her, a small spark of hope refused to die, though she didn't even know where it had come from. At night, when the mine was quiet and the other workers had collapsed into fitful sleep, Ayanna would sit near a tiny crack in the rock wall that let in a sliver of moonlight. She would press her palm against the stone, imagining it as a doorway to a world beyond the canyon. She dreamed of wide-open skies, of running without chains, of hearing birds sing in trees instead of the endless clanging of metal. These dreams were fragile, and she kept them to herself, knowing that showing any sign of imagination or longing could invite the attention of the guards. Ayanna's mind often wandered back to her family, to the days before the raid that had taken her from her village. She remembered her mother's gentle voice, the warmth of her grandmother's embrace, and the laughter of children playing near the river. Those memories were like distant stars, small points of light in the darkness of her life. She held on to them secretly, letting them remind her that she was still a person, still capable of feeling, still capable of hope. One morning, as she moved through the mine carrying a heavy load of stones, Ayanna noticed something unusual. The air above the mine seemed to vibrate with the sound of hooves. At first she thought it was her imagination, but the sound grew louder and more distinct. Horses. Someone was riding near the canyon rim. She froze, listening carefully. The guards had always warned them to pay attention to the sounds outside, to be ready for inspections or inspections that could turn into punishments. But this sound was different. It carried no threat, only movement, a rhythm that suggested someone was passing through the land above the mines. Ayanna could not take her eyes off the tiny sliver of light where the moon had been replaced by the rising sun. She wondered who was riding so early. Was it a trader, a miner, or someone else? She felt a flicker of curiosity, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself in years. For a brief moment, she imagined riding a horse, feeling the wind on her face, the freedom to move without fear. The thought made her heart beat faster, though she quickly forced herself to focus back on her work. The days passed slowly, each one almost the same as the last, but the sound of hooves returned again and again. Ayanna began to notice small signs of life outside the mine. Birds had started appearing near the canyon edges, and the light of the sun seemed warmer somehow. She realized that the world beyond the rock walls was alive, vibrant, and free. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine that she might one day leave this dark place. She whispered the word freedom to herself, barely daring to say it aloud, but the sound felt like a soft promise, a small seed planted in her heart. One afternoon, a harsh shout came from the mine entrance. Ayanna and the other workers froze as the guards barked orders. A new group of miners had arrived, and the mine owner himself came down to inspect the work. He moved through the tunnels with sharp eyes, checking the walls, the piles of stone, and the tools. His presence was intimidating, a reminder of the power they held over her life. Ayanna swallowed her fear and kept her head down, moving as instructed, careful not to meet his gaze. She had learned that survival depended on obedience, on blending into the shadows and not drawing attention. Even with the constant fear, Ayanna began noticing small details in the mine she had never observed before. Tiny veins of silver ran through the rock, glinting in the faint light from the torches. She imagined that these veins were like the threads of hope running through her life, small but shining, waiting to be discovered. She started to memorize the tunnels, the hidden corners where the guards rarely looked, and the places where sunlight occasionally touched the walls. These observations were dangerous, but they also gave her a sense of control, a feeling that she could navigate this world despite the chains that bound her. As the weeks went by, Ayana found herself talking less to the other workers. She had learned that words could be dangerous and silence was often the safest choice. Instead, she focused on her own thoughts, her memories, and the dreams that grew quietly in her mind. She began keeping track of the sun's movement, counting the days by the patterns of light that slipped through the cracks. Each day was a reminder that time still moved, and with time came the possibility of change. One evening, as she rested her back against the cold rock wall, Ayana noticed something she had not seen before. A small patch of green outside a tunnel opening, barely visible through a narrow gap. It was a tiny plant, stubbornly growing in the shadow of the mine. She smiled faintly, a rare expression that came from deep inside her. The plant reminded her that life could persist even in the darkest places, that even she could survive and perhaps one day thrive beyond these walls. Ayana began thinking more about the riders she had heard above the mine. Who were they? Why did they travel these lands? Could one of them notice her, see her plight, and somehow offer help? The thought was dangerous, foolish even, but it stirred something inside her that had lain dormant for years. A sense of curiosity, a small flame of hope. She could not stop imagining that someone might arrive who could change her life, who could help her escape this endless darkness. Night after night, she sat by her little crack of moonlight, thinking about the world outside, about horses, trees, rivers, and open skies. She began making small plans in her mind, though she knew they were fragile. She would watch the guards carefully, learn their routines, and memorize the path she might take if an opportunity ever arose. She was cautious, knowing that any wrong move could be disastrous, but she felt a strange sense of purpose growing in her heart. For the first time in years, she did not feel completely lost. Then one morning, the sound she had come to expect, the hooves of horses above the canyon, returned. But this time there was something different about it. The rhythm seemed steady, calm and deliberate, as if the rider knew exactly where they were going. Ayana's heart pounded in her chest. She watched the entrance of the mine carefully, wondering if this could be the moment that her long years of suffering might change. The sun broke over the mountains, painting the rocks with golden warmth. For a brief moment, Ayana allowed herself to believe in something she had almost forgotten, that freedom might exist beyond the walls of her prison, and that someone could come riding into her life to help her find it. Even as the guards barked orders and the other workers continued their toil, Ayana felt a strange lightness in her chest. She did not know who the rider was or if they were friend or stranger, but she knew that the world outside the mine was alive, waiting, and perhaps ready to offer her a second chance at life. She pressed her hand against the cool rock wall, imagining the feel of open air and the warmth of the sun. And for the first time in years, Ayana allowed herself a small, quiet hope that her life might one day be more than this dark, endless tunnel. The sun rose higher over the canyon, warming the rugged land and casting long shadows over the dusty mining town. Outside the dark mine, the world seemed alive and bright, though for Ayana it remained a distant memory. She moved through the tunnels as usual, hauling stones and keeping her head down, yet the sound of hooves had returned again, this time closer, sharper, more deliberate. Someone was riding through the canyon, and Ayana could not stop her eyes from darting to the small cracks where sunlight crept in. She felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity. The sound made her heart beat faster, reminding her that the world outside still existed, a place she had almost forgotten. The rider appeared over the canyon rim just as the town came to life. Dust swirled around the hooves of a dark horse, and a man rode calmly through the streets. He was not like the rough men who owned the mines or the guards who kept watch. There was a quiet strength about him, a careful patience in the way he guided his horse. He stopped near the center of town, observing the miners and the wagons with a steady gaze. People whispered among themselves, pointing out the stranger who seemed so different from anyone they had seen before. He was a cowboy, they said, though there was something unusual about him, something that made him stand out even among the many riders of the Wild West. The cowboy's name was Eli. He had come to the town looking for work with horses, needing a place to stay and a few days of rest. He was quiet, keeping to himself, but his eyes moved constantly, taking in every detail. When he noticed the mine workers, he felt a subtle pull in his chest. Among the rough and tired faces, one stood out. A young girl, small and silent, with dark hair falling across her face, moved with a strange grace despite the heavy burden she carried. Her hands were raw, her clothes torn, yet her eyes held something unusual, a glimmer of strength that refused to be broken. Eli felt an unexpected ache in his heart, a mixture of sorrow and concern he could not explain. He began asking questions around town. At the general store, he inquired about the mines, about the workers, about the lives of those who spent their days underground. The townspeople were hesitant, wary of strangers, but Eli's calm tone made them relax. He heard whispers of children and young girls forced to work long hours, of cruelty from the mine owners, of lives spent in darkness. His heart ached as he pieced together the story. Something about the girl he had seen drew his attention again and again. He could not shake the feeling that she needed help, though he had no idea how he could give it. Ayanna noticed him too. From a small opening near the mine entrance, she glimpsed the stranger as he moved through the streets. There was a calm in the way he walked, a careful awareness that made him different from the others who had passed through. She did not trust easily. Years of pain and betrayal had taught her that. Still, she could not look away. Something in his presence stirred a feeling she had not experienced in a long time. Hope. It was fragile, delicate, and she kept it hidden, afraid that acknowledging it might make her vulnerable. Yet the tiny spark was there, flickering like a candle in the wind. Days passed, and Eli continued to watch the mine from a distance. He noticed patterns, the way the guards moved, the schedules of inspections, the places where the sun touched the stone walls, and the shadows where workers could hide for brief moments. He was cautious, aware that the mine owners would not welcome interference. Yet he could not ignore the girl, the small figure who seemed so fragile and yet so alive within the darkness. He began planning quietly, thinking of ways to help without drawing attention. He brought small gifts, a loaf of bread left near the entrance, a bottle of clean water. They were simple gestures, but they carried more meaning than he could express. He wanted to show her that someone outside the mine cared, that the world beyond the walls still had kindness. At first, Ayanna did not touch the offerings. She watched from the shadows, her mind wary. Gifts had come before, promises of freedom, of escape, of care, and they had always ended in disappointment. Yet the bread and water remained untouched by others, left carefully where she could reach them. Slowly, curiosity overcame her caution. She picked up a piece of bread one morning, biting into it quietly, savoring the warmth it brought to her stomach. It was a small taste of kindness she had not known in years. She left a small thank you note in the dust, a gesture that went unnoticed by the guards but was seen by Eli. He smiled faintly, knowing that the smallest connections were the first steps toward trust. As the days turned into weeks, Eli continued his quiet watch. He learned the routines of the mine, the way the guards spoke, the hidden back routes that led to the forest beyond the canyon. Each day he moved closer to understanding how he could offer a chance at freedom, without putting the girl in immediate danger. He studied the paths, the timings, the behavior of the men who controlled the mine. Ayanna began noticing small signs of his presence. Bread left near the entrance, clean water bottles, the faint shadow of a horse in the morning light. Her heart stirred with feelings she had almost forgotten. Was it possible that someone cared for her? That someone could see her as more than a slave? The thought was frightening, yet it filled her with a tentative hope. One afternoon, Eli overheard the guards talking near the mine entrance. They were loud, boasting about how they kept the girl and the other workers under control. His jaw tightened as he listened, anger mixing with determination. He realized that if he acted too soon, the consequences could be disastrous, not just for him but for the girl. Yet the fire within him burned brighter. He began to imagine a plan, a way to guide her out of the darkness and into the open world she deserved. He moved carefully, always observing, always calculating. Every step had to be precise. Every moment had to be timed perfectly. Ayanna noticed the way he seemed to study the mine from the distance, his calm gaze never wavering. She could not understand why he paid attention to her, why a stranger would care about someone so small and unseen. Yet there was no threat in his presence, no cruelty, only a quiet patience that made her curious. She began to watch him in return, noticing the way he moved, the way he listened to the land. the way he seemed to respect everything around him. Slowly, she began to imagine a different life, one where she could walk in the sunlight, run through the grass, breathe without fear. The idea was dangerous, almost foolish, but it grew stronger each day. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the sky turned shades of pink and gold, Eli made a careful approach to the mine entrance. He left a small bundle of clean clothes and a loaf of bread, placing them where she could find them safely. Ayanna hesitated, then reached for the items, feeling the softness of the fabric against her worn clothes. For the first time in years, she felt a small flicker of warmth in her chest, a sense that perhaps someone outside the mine could care for her life, could offer her a chance she had long believed impossible. The night fell, and Ayanna sat by the small crack of moonlight, thinking of the cowboy and the strange hope he had brought into her world. She did not speak, did not move, only held the small bundle close to her chest. For years she had known only fear and darkness, but now a tiny seed of hope had been planted. She whispered it softly to herself, a secret she would carry into the coming days. Perhaps, just perhaps, the world beyond the mine was real. Perhaps someone truly cared. And perhaps one day she could leave the darkness behind and step into the life she had only dared to imagine. As the stars appeared one by one in the sky, Ayanna allowed herself a single thought that she had not entertained in years. She might be free one day. Not today, not yet, but someday. And the quiet cowboy who had ridden into the canyon, who had noticed her in the midst of pain and despair, might just be the person who would help her find that freedom. She pressed her hand against the cool stone wall, feeling the rough texture beneath her palm, imagining the world beyond. It was a dangerous dream, a fragile hope, but it was hers to hold. And for the first time in many years, Ayanna felt that she was not completely alone. The days in the mine grew heavier as the sun climbed higher, and the work became more relentless. Ayanna's muscles ached, her hands blistered, and the dust seemed to cling to her skin like a second layer. Yet amidst the endless monotony, she had begun to notice small changes. The loaf of bread left at the entrance by the cowboy Eli had become a lifeline. The clean water he brought was a gift that eased her thirst and gave her a quiet sense of care she had not known in years. She had started watching the patterns of his visits, timing them by the shadows and the faint light of the moon or sun. A small hope had taken root inside her, fragile but persistent, that someone outside the mine could see her as more than a worker, more than a child stolen from her home. Eli, meanwhile, had been observing the mine from a distance for weeks. He had memorized the movements of the guards, the timing of the inspections, and the places where the workers were most vulnerable. He was careful to remain unseen, knowing that any misstep could put both him and Ayanna in grave danger. Each night he rode along hidden trails, studying the terrain around the mine and the paths that led to the forest beyond. He was patient, knowing that rushing could destroy any chance of success. Yet his determination grew stronger with each passing day. He could not ignore the small, silent girl whose eyes shone with quiet strength amid such darkness. Something inside him refused to turn away. Ayanna had begun to notice more than just the offerings. She noticed the way the cowboy moved through the town, the way he observed the mine without interfering, and the careful patience in his movements. At first she had been wary, afraid of any kindness, afraid of being tricked or punished. But over time she began to trust him, in the small, cautious way that years of suffering had allowed her. She started leaving tiny signs of acknowledgement, a piece of bread eaten, a small mark in the dust, a whispered word into the night. She did not speak to him directly for fear of the guards, but she allowed herself to feel the presence of someone who might care, someone who might help her escape this life of darkness. One night, Eli followed a wagon moving supplies from the mine to a nearby forest path. He noticed a narrow trail that wound around the edge of the canyon, hidden from view of the guards. The path was rough, steep in places, but it led into the dense forest beyond the mountains. Eli studied it carefully, imagining the possibilities it offered. He could guide Ayanna along this path far from the eyes of the guards into safety, but the plan was risky. One misstep, one miscalculation, and the guards would catch them. The thought made his stomach tighten, but he could not ignore the need to act. He had to find a way to help her, to offer a chance at freedom that had been denied to her for so long. Ayanna noticed the small changes in the mine as well. The guards seemed distracted at times. The shadows shifted in ways that offered brief moments of privacy, and the moonlight occasionally touched hidden corners of the tunnels. She began imagining what it would be like to move through those shadows, to step beyond the walls of the mine, and to feel the world outside on her skin once more. She knew it was dangerous to even think of escape, but the thought brought a thrill of life she had not felt in years. She began watching the forest in the distance, imagining the trees, the rivers, and the open skies. She whispered to herself that someday, somehow she might find a way to reach them. Eli began leaving small signs along the edges of the mine, hidden where she could see them, but the guards could not. A fresh piece of bread, a tiny note scratched into the dust, a small bundle of clean cloth. Each was a message, a silent communication between them. Ayanna began to respond in her own way, leaving marks in the dust, moving objects slightly, showing that she was aware and willing to engage. It was a slow, careful process, a silent conversation that built trust and understanding without a single word being spoken aloud. Each day the connection grew stronger, and Ayanna began to feel a sense of hope that had been absent for years. One afternoon, as the sun warmed the canyon walls, Eli saw an opportunity to get closer. The guards had moved away to another part of the mine, and a section of the tunnel was left unguarded. He approached quietly, keeping to the shadows, and left a bundle of water and food where Ayanna could reach it. She saw him for a brief moment, their eyes meeting across the distance. It was the first time she had seen him so close, and her heart raced. She did not speak, but the look in her eyes spoke volumes. She was scared, but she also felt a flicker of trust, a small flame that had been kept alive by his careful attention and patient gestures. That night, as the mine grew quiet and the other workers slept, Ayanna sat near the crack of moonlight and thought about the cowboy who had entered her life. She had not allowed herself to hope, not truly, for many years. But now, with each small act of kindness, each silent message, she felt the possibility of something more. She imagined riding a horse, feeling the wind on her face, and running through the forest without fear. The images were fragile, delicate, yet they filled her with a sense of life she had almost forgotten. She pressed her hand against the cool stone, imagining it as a door to the world beyond, a door that Eli might help her open. Eli, on his part, spent hours planning. He had to be careful, for any mistake could be fatal. He studied the guards' movements, the shadows in the tunnels, and the hidden paths leading to the forest. He imagined every possible obstacle, every challenge they might face, and prepared for them. He also considered Ayanna's state. The years in the mine had made her cautious and fearful. He could not rush her, could not push too hard. Patience was the key. He had to earn her trust fully before any attempt at escape could succeed. Every decision was measured, every movement calculated, and every act of kindness deliberate. He could not fail. Days passed, and Ayanna began to sense the pattern. The cowboy was not like the others. He was careful, observant, patient, and kind. For the first time in years, she felt a connection with someone who did not see her as a tool or a slave, but as a person with thoughts, feelings, and a right to freedom. She began to imagine a life beyond the mine, a life where she could walk in the sun, run through the forest, and breathe without fear. The thought scared her and thrilled her at the same time. It was dangerous to dream, but the dreams gave her strength. They reminded her that she was still alive, still capable of hope, still capable of escaping the darkness that had consumed so many years of her life. One evening, as the sky turned orange and pink with the setting sun, Eli left a small note in the dust near the mine entrance. It was simple, a message of encouragement and patience written in the form of marks he knew she could understand. Ayanna found it and studied it carefully. She felt a mix of fear and excitement. Could she trust him fully? Could she believe that someone cared enough to risk everything for her? She did not know yet, but the thought of escape, of freedom, and of life beyond the mine grew stronger. She pressed the note close to her chest, feeling a small surge of courage. The night fell, and Ayanna sat by the crack of moonlight, thinking about the path that might lead her out of the mine. She did not speak, did not move, but she imagined the forest, the river, the open skies. She pictured herself running, free and unafraid, with the cowboy guiding her. The image was vivid and alive in her mind, filling her heart with hope and determination. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that freedom was not just a dream, but a possibility that someone outside the mine cared enough to help her achieve. Eli, meanwhile, continued his careful planning. He knew that time was essential. Every day he observed, calculated, and prepared, waiting for the perfect moment to act. He imagined guiding Ayana through the hidden paths, through the shadows, and into the forest beyond. He imagined the dangers, the obstacles, and the challenges they would face and prepared for each one. His patience and careful observation had brought him to this point. He was ready, but he knew that he had to wait until Ayana was ready as well. Trust, he understood, could not be rushed. As the stars appeared in the sky and the night grew quiet, Ayana felt a small flame of courage grow inside her. She pressed her hand against the stone wall, imagining the world beyond the mine, imagining the forest, the river, the open skies. She whispered a promise to herself, that she would not give up, that she would seize any chance for freedom, and that she would trust, cautiously, the cowboy who had shown her that hope could still exist. It was dangerous, fragile, and uncertain, but it was hers to hold, and for the first time in many years she felt that she was not completely alone. The night was deep and quiet, the kind of darkness that seemed to swallow the edges of the canyon and turn shadows into shapes that might move. Ayana lay in the mine, her back pressed against the cold stone, listening to the faint sound of the wind whispering through the tunnels. She had hardly slept, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and hope. The lessons of years in the mine had taught her that trust was dangerous, that even a moment of carelessness could mean punishment. Yet tonight was different. Tonight, something in her chest told her that change was near, that the chance for freedom had finally arrived. Eli waited outside, hidden behind a cluster of boulders near the narrow canyon path. His horse, a sturdy dark mare, shifted its weight nervously, but Eli remained calm, his eyes fixed on the mine entrance. Every detail mattered. The position of the guards, the timing of their rounds, the slightest sound that might betray his presence. He had memorized every shadow and every sound over the past weeks, planning this escape with patience and care. Now the moment had come. The mine's usual guards had shifted, distracted by the arrival of a new shipment, and the entrance lay vulnerable. Eli's heart beat faster, but he kept his movements slow and deliberate. One wrong step could ruin everything. Inside the mine, Ayana moved silently, carrying a small bundle Eli had left for her, a loaf of bread, a water skin, and a soft piece of cloth to wrap around her worn clothing. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the straps on her back. Years of labor and fear had made her cautious, each step deliberate, each sound measured. She had memorized the shadows, the hidden corners, and the moments when the guard's attention faltered. Every movement was a careful dance, a balance between courage and caution. Tonight she was no longer just surviving. She was preparing to step into a life she had only imagined in dreams. As she approached the entrance, Ayana paused, listening for any sign of danger. The faint rustle of a horse's mane in the night told her that Eli was waiting, and she felt a flicker of relief mixed with fear. She pressed herself into the shadows, moving slowly toward the light of the moon that spilled over the canyon's edge. Her breath came in short, careful bursts. The wind carried the scent of pine and earth, a smell she had not known in years. It was intoxicating, filling her with a strange sense of possibility. She dared not rush. Patience was her ally, as it had been for so long in the mine. Eli stepped out from the shadows, his hand extended toward her. His face was calm, encouraging, yet his eyes held a quiet intensity that spoke of the danger they faced. "This way," he whispered softly, barely audible over the gentle rustle of leaves. Ayana nodded, keeping her gaze low, and moved toward him. The rough terrain of the canyon made each step difficult, but she moved steadily, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. She could feel the presence of freedom just beyond her reach, and the thought drove her forward despite the fear that clung to her like a second skin. The first challenge came almost immediately. A guard moving along the canyon edge glanced toward the entrance just as Ayana and Eli stepped into the open. Eli froze, pressing her against the side of a boulder. They held their breath, waiting, silent as the night itself. The guard's shadow passed, moving on without noticing the slight movement behind the rocks. Ayana's heart nearly leapt from her chest, but she remained still, following Eli's careful lead. Every moment was tense, every step a risk, yet the thought of escape kept her grounded and focused. As they moved along the hidden path, the canyon walls grew steeper, and the trail became narrow. Loose stones shifted under their feet, and the sound of a twig snapping threatened to betray them. Eli led, his hand steady on the reins of the horse, guiding it with skill through the rough terrain. Ayana followed closely, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. The forest beyond the canyon loomed like a dark promise, full of danger and opportunity alike. She could almost taste the pine-scented air, almost feel the cool grass beneath her feet. The closer they moved to the forest, the more alive she felt, though the fear never fully left her. Suddenly, a shout rang out from the mine behind them. Ayana's heart leapt into her throat. One of the guards had noticed something, a flicker of movement, a shadow in the night. Eli's face tightened, but he did not panic. He urged the horse forward, moving with practiced skill through the narrow canyon paths. Ayana stumbled over a loose rock, nearly falling, but Eli's steady hand on her shoulder kept her upright. "Keep moving," he whispered, his voice firm but gentle. Her fear was sharp, but she obeyed, driven by the thought of the life waiting just beyond the canyon. The guards were close now, their voices shouting commands and alarm. The sound echoed through the rocks, bouncing off the canyon walls in a way that made the danger feel immediate and suffocating. Eli guided the horse with care, moving along hidden trails that twisted and turned, taking paths the guards could not easily follow. Ayana's breath came fast and shallow, her body tense with adrenaline. She felt every nerve alive, every sense heightened. This was freedom in its rawest form, terrifying, exhilarating, and completely real. After what felt like hours, though it was only minutes, the canyon opened into a small valley, partially hidden by trees and brush. Eli slowed the horse, guiding it into the shelter of the forest. Ayana followed, her legs trembling but steady, and for the first time in years she stepped into a space that felt safe. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting silver patterns on the ground. The air was cool and fresh, scented with pine and earth. She took a deep breath, letting it fill her lungs with the promise of life beyond the mine. Tears filled her eyes, not from fear or pain, but from relief, joy, and disbelief. She was free. They paused for a moment, listening to the sounds of the forest. The distant shouts of the guards had faded, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the faint murmur of a nearby stream. Ayana knelt by the edge of the water, cupping it in her hands and drinking deeply. The taste was sweet and clean, a sharp contrast to the dust and bitterness she had endured for years. She felt the tension in her body begin to ease, though the memory of the mine and the danger they had just escaped lingered like a shadow. She pressed her hand against the cool water, as if to solidify the reality of freedom, letting herself believe that this was real. Eli dismounted from the horse, offering her his hand to help steady herself. "You're safe now," he said softly, his voice a comforting anchor in the midst of her trembling. Ayana looked at him, unsure if she could trust the calm words, but something in his eyes, steady, patient, determined, convinced her. She took his hand, letting him guide her through the forest, moving away from the path of the guards. Every step was cautious, deliberate, but each one took her further from the darkness and closer to a life she had long dreamed of. As they moved deeper into the forest, Ayana's fear began to transform into exhilaration. She allowed herself to look up at the sky, the wide expanse of stars above her, and she felt a strange, liberating joy. The chains of the mine, the years of forced labor and fear, seemed to fall away with each step. She walked beside Eli, learning the rhythm of his movements, the quiet signals he gave, the careful pace he set to keep them safe. The forest felt alive, protective, and she let herself imagine a future beyond the trees and mountains. Hours passed as they moved cautiously through the dense forest. The sound of the guards was gone, replaced by the whispers of the wind and the occasional call of an owl. Ayana's body ached, her muscles tired from running and climbing, but her spirit soared. She had taken her first real steps toward freedom, guided by someone who had seen her, believed in her, and risked everything to help her escape. The forest stretched out before them, dark but full of possibility, and she knew that each moment brought her closer to a life she could finally call her own. By dawn, they reached a hidden valley far from the mine. Soft grass covered the ground and a gentle stream wound its way through the trees. Ayana sank to her knees, letting the cool water wash over her hands, feeling it as a symbol of life and hope. The air was fresh, filled with the scents of pine, earth, and wildflowers. She looked up at Eli, her eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude. "We made it," he whispered, smiling faintly but with eyes that still held the caution of the night's dangers. Ayana nodded, feeling the weight of years lift from her shoulders, replaced by a fragile but growing sense of safety. For the first time in many years, Ayana allowed herself to feel relief, joy, and hope. The night had been long and full of danger, but she had survived, and she had stepped into a world that felt alive and welcoming. She pressed her hands into the soft grass, letting the sensation of freedom sink into her bones. Eli stood nearby, keeping watch, but offering her the space to breathe and to begin believing that life beyond the mine was possible. The journey was far from over, but the first and most dangerous step had been taken, and in the quiet light of dawn, Ayanna realized that the impossible, her freedom, had finally begun. The morning sunlight poured over the hidden valley, spilling through the trees and warming the soft grass beneath Ayanna's feet. She had not felt sunlight in years, not since she had been taken from her village and forced to work in the mine. The warmth on her skin, the gentle sound of the stream, and the fresh scent of pine and earth were almost overwhelming. She knelt by the water, cupping it in her hands and drinking deeply. Each sip reminded her that she was alive, that she had survived, and that she had finally escaped the darkness that had defined so many years of her life. The air was cool and sweet, and for the first time she allowed herself to breathe fully without fear pressing down on her chest. Eli stood nearby, keeping watch over the small valley. He had guided her through the night with patience and care, his eyes constantly scanning for danger, his mind always thinking ahead. But now, with the first rays of sunlight illuminating the forest, he felt a moment of relief. The hardest part had been done. They had escaped the mine. The guards were far behind, and for the first time in years, Ayanna could be safe. He watched her kneel by the stream, feeling a mix of pride and quiet joy. She was fragile, yes, after years of labor and fear, but she was also strong, and her spirit shone brighter than the morning light. Ayanna's movements were slow at first, almost hesitant. Years in the mine had left her body aching, and every step required care. But the valley was soft under her feet, covered in grass that felt like a blanket after the rough stone and dust of the tunnels. She lifted her face to the sky, letting the sunlight touch her cheeks. She felt a strange, unfamiliar emotion swell inside her. Hope. It was not the fragile, fleeting hope she had kept hidden for so long. This was different. This was tangible, real, and warm. The world around her was alive, and she was a part of it once more. Eli approached slowly, speaking softly so as not to startle her. "Take your time," he said. "You are safe here. No one can hurt you now." His voice was calm, steady, and full of reassurance. Ayanna looked at him, her dark eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude. She had not known kindness in years, and the quiet care in his words and actions made her heart ache in a way that was new to her. She wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she nodded, letting him know she understood, letting him know that she trusted him, at least in this moment. The days that followed were slow and careful. Ayanna had to relearn many things that she had forgotten or never experienced. The softness of grass under her bare feet, the warmth of a gentle breeze, the taste of fresh food that was not stale or covered in dust. Eli taught her small tasks, guiding her hand as she collected berries, showing her how to follow the stream for fresh water, and teaching her to care for herself in ways she had never known. Each lesson was small, but each one was a step toward healing. Ayanna felt her body grow stronger, her muscles loosening, her movements becoming more confident. The valley became her sanctuary, a place where she could begin to shed the years of fear and pain. At first, she did not speak much. The trauma of the mine had left her cautious, wary of words and the reactions they might provoke. But Eli never pressured her. He understood that trust could not be forced. He worked quietly, providing food, guidance, and protection, letting her set the pace. Over time, she began to speak softly, first in whispers, then in full sentences. She shared fragments of her past, stories of her village, memories of her family, and the pain she had endured. Each story was met with gentle listening and understanding, never judgment or impatience. Ayanna felt a strange relief in speaking, as if sharing her experiences was helping her carry the weight she had borne alone for so long. She also began to learn about the wider world. Eli told her about the lands beyond the valley, about towns and rivers, forests and plains, about people who lived in ways she had never seen. Her curiosity grew with each story, and soon she wanted to explore beyond the trees to see the land she had only imagined in her dreams. Eli encouraged her, teaching her to ride the horse, to move through the forest safely, and to trust her own senses. With every lesson, Ayanna's confidence grew, her spirit brightening like the dawn. She laughed quietly, a sound she had not made in years, and the valley seemed to echo with the joy she had almost forgotten. One afternoon, as they rested by the stream, Ayanna looked at Eli with a mixture of gratitude and awe. "I never thought I could feel safe again," she said softly. "I never thought I could be free." Her voice trembled, but there was strength in it too. Eli smiled, a quiet, calm smile, and nodded. "You are free now," he said. "And you will always be safe here as long as you need." The words were simple, but they carried a weight of promise that made Ayanna's heart swell. She felt tears prick at her eyes, tears of relief, of joy, and of the quiet wonder of living. The days turned into weeks, and Ayanna's healing continued. She became stronger, more confident, and more aware of her own abilities. She learned to ride the horse with skill and balance, to walk through the forest without fear, and to find food and water on her own. She began to smile more often, her laughter growing louder, filling the valley with life. The scars of the mine remained both on her body and in her memories, but they no longer defined her. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a young woman reclaiming her life. Eli remained a steady presence in her world, offering guidance, protection, and care without demanding anything in return. He gave her the space to grow, to learn, and to heal. In return, Ayanna began to trust him fully, relying on his calm strength while discovering her own. Together, they explored the valley, following the stream, climbing small hills and discovering hidden clearings filled with sunlight. Each day was a lesson in freedom, a reminder that life could be gentle, that kindness could exist, and that the world beyond the mine was full of possibility. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the sky turned shades of orange and purple, Ayanna sat on a small hill looking out over the valley. The air was filled with the sound of birds, the gentle rustle of leaves, and the distant murmur of the stream. She felt a sense of peace she had never known, a feeling that the years of pain and fear were finally behind her. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her own heartbeat, and whispered a quiet thank you, to the world, to herself, and to the cowboy who had changed her life. Over time, Ayanna began to embrace her identity, her heritage, and her strength. She remembered her village, her family, and the traditions she had once known, and she began to reclaim them in small ways. She made simple tools, prepared food, and practiced old songs she had sung in her childhood. Each act was a step toward wholeness, a way to stitch together the pieces of her life that had been broken. She no longer feared the past, nor did she see herself only as a victim. She was Ayanna, survivor, fighter, and now young woman free in the world. Eli watched her growth with quiet pride. He had not forced her to heal, nor had he rushed her into action. Instead, he had offered guidance, patience, and steady care, allowing her to regain confidence at her own pace. Their bond was built on trust, respect, and the shared experience of the escape. While he had been the guide in her flight from the mine, she had been the one to reclaim her own life step by step with courage and determination. Together, they formed a partnership based not on dependence but on understanding and mutual respect. The valley became a place of safety, growth, and freedom. Ayanna no longer hid in the shadows, and she no longer feared the world. She explored the forests, rode the horse across open meadows, and laughed with a joy that had been absent for years. She had found her strength, and she had found hope. The scars of the mine would always remain, but they were no longer a chain. Instead, they were a testament to her survival, her courage, and her journey toward a life she had once believed impossible. One morning, as the sun rose high and bright over the valley, Ayanna stood on a small hill, looking out over the land that was now hers to explore. She felt the wind on her face, the warmth of the sun on her skin, and the quiet strength in her chest. She looked at Eli, who stood a short distance away, watching over her with steady eyes. She smiled, a full, genuine smile, and whispered softly, "I am free." For the first time in years, she truly believed it. Freedom was no longer a dream, a fragile hope, or a distant memory. It was real, and it was hers. Ayanna's life in the valley continued, filled with learning, laughter, and quiet reflection. She grew stronger, more confident, and more aware of the possibilities the world held. She had been through years of suffering, but those years had not broken her spirit. Instead, they had shaped her resilience, her courage, and her determination to live fully. With Eli's guidance and the safety of the valley, she began to build a life defined not by fear, but by freedom, hope, and the knowledge that she could survive and thrive no matter what challenges lay ahead.